Claudia, I'm so glad that you're here in the YouTube channel with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Leslie. It's my pleasure.
It is my pleasure to host you. So, for those of you who don't know, this is Claudia Leroy from Claudia Travels and the author of one of my favorite new books, A Gelato a Day, which is an anthology of travel stories from 20 different people. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. 20 different writers.
And if you don't have this, you have to get it. You can see mine is well worn and loved because I've read some of them a couple times. Beautiful, beautiful story. You know what the stories remind me of? And so Claudia, for those of you who don't know, is from Vancouver. Of course, I'm in the United States. So I think about the New Yorker, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Yeah. And the stories remind me, they're shorter, but they remind me I have that same sort of feel that it's just feel good stories that really touch your heart. So they're very beautiful.
Oh, thank you very
Can
much,
you
Leslie.
tell us about how this came together? How did you pick? Certainly you had more than 20 stories to pick from.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the process for Gelato a Day kind of started back. I've been thinking about wanting to do a book for quite a long time. And I wanted to kind of share the joy of what family travel could be. That's how I originally started writing when I started my blogging journey. Was to write about what I knew about family travel. I've been traveling with family since I was a baby and have done a lot of it with my own children. And when I started doing research about the possibility of writing an anthology, because I thought about, kind of sharing the love. I didn't want all the stories to be mine. That was kind of like at the beginning of the process. I didn't want to write a book just on my own. I kind of knew a lot of writers and respected, the storytelling that they do and thought that they would have interesting stories to tell that readers would also find interesting. So when I started doing my research about anthologies, because one of the things that the book industry and agents will tell you is like, well, who's your competition? In the anthology universe, in the book industry. And when I started reading wax of travel anthologies, they were all themed around different travel subjects. So backpacking stories, women travel stories written by just women, stories centered on destinations like 20 stories or 50 stories about Italy or Greece, or coming of age stories, solo travel stories like Lonely Planet anthologies. There were a lot of those ones. But there was not one book that focused exclusively on telling stories about traveling with your family as an anthology. So I thought, well, there's kind of a business case to be made. And so I made it when I sent out my, my book proposal, kind of showing, why this would make sense as a book, not just the storytelling aspect, but, the business case, which is a whole other interesting conversation about how the book industry works. But anyway, the first person I sent it to said, I like that idea. And so it was like,
And you
bingo.
were done.
Yeah, it was kind of insane. I thought, is this real? Like, is this really happening? And so they sent the contract and I'm like, wow, that was January of 2020. And so, I'm getting all, sending out emails to everybody I know, posting, notifications saying, send stories in if you're interested. And then the pandemic hit in March 2020. And of course, everybody stopped life as we knew it, right? And all of, our travel writing colleagues, nobody was traveling. And so in terms of timing, the book project ended up being this incredibly serendipitous timing because all of my travel writing friends and colleagues and people who submitted stories weren't traveling. And travel writing at that time, well, nobody wanted stories about traveling because publications were like, well, no one's traveling. So yeah, no, let's hold that for now. And so people had time to write, which was a blessing because then they had time to write a story for the anthology. So it actually worked out in a kind of backwards, upside downy kind of way, making the best out of a difficult time for all of us. And so collecting these stories during that time was also a perfect project for me, because I was impacted obviously as well with, no travel for that time, and travel writing kind of, took a little bit of a pause, shall we say?
Yes.
And anyway, and so
That's
that's
saying
kind
it
of the long
nicely.
story of how the book came to be. But
Well, and then what's beautiful about that is then it came out at a time when everybody's now excited about travel again, like gung ho. Even people maybe who didn't travel regularly were like, we're going.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. And you know, because it came out in fall of 2022, and back in 2020 I was like, "Oh, this seems so far away." And then, you know, unbeknownst to all of us, the pandemic, you know, put a massive spanner in that, you know, everybody's time frame. And so yeah, when people were kind of like getting back into the thought of travel and planning travel for the future and like really going, you know, we're going to really go and we want to reconnect with family because we've missed the people we love. We haven't been able to see grandparents or travel to see them depending on where they're located. You know, like we've missed a lot. And so, you know, gathering together again, being together as family, and also showing the side of family travel that it's much more than just, you know, packing the kids and squabbling in the car and you know, always hitting, you know, whatever, you know, spot, but actually the the experience of traveling with family goes so much deeper than that. And I think the stories in the anthology really demonstrate, you know, I say kind of half jokingly, the good, the bad, the not that ugly of family travel. We all have those moments we remember as kids or with our own kids going, oh my God, how will we survive? But then we laugh decades later about many of those moments. But also the opportunity to connect with people, I think, really resonates in our current time about how important it is to spend time with the people you love out of your daily routine when you're caught up in life, work, school, right? And how your relationships can really deepen or become illuminated by the travel experience, which I think the book really shows. So,
Well, and that leads me to, I wanted to share with people, I think one of my favorite things is a story early on in the book. I'm going to mess it up. So for the record, I asked Claudia how to pronounce this beforehand, and now I'm still going to mess it up. Diane
no,
Selkirk
correct.
did a story. So early in the book, a story about Diane, and she and her partner taking their child as a young child sailing around the world with, and people were like, you're going to do what with your kid? And then a story at the end from their daughter, who in the story is 13, but I guess now she's 19.
Yeah. So she's, I think now she's, I think 21, but yeah,
Okay.
during her story is based when she was 13. Yeah.
About her journey when they landed in Sri Lanka and trying to do a hike by herself and what happened there. So it's a beautiful um, um, pulling together how travel, when we travel with our kids, how it impacts them and lives with them forever and ever. And I love that you have those two stories that become their own story. And
Yeah.
just that the two of them are there side by side.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. I worked really hard when I was placing the stories. Once I had chosen from the stories that were submitted, um, trying to kind of make sense of the flow of the 20 stories, starting with Bruce Kirkby's, which is kind of you're traveling with a young child, you know, are you crazy? They went to Bhutan, like, you know, incredible types of things, and kind of going through the continuum of parents with young kids and then teenagers and then people writing about their own experiences and finishing it with Maya's story, her looking back and having her mother Diane's story about, you know, traveling with her when she was younger. I felt that that was the
Seeing the
perfect,
whales. I love that. Seeing the whales.
yeah,
She
it was
likes
the
whales and
perfect
she likes
way.
being with us. That's what her mom said.
Oh God, Diane is such a magnificent writer. I just enjoy her. Because she's also a friend and her words and Maya's ending is just it's just so perfect. The continuum of this is why, you know, this is why we do what we do when we want to travel with family. And it doesn't have to be to Sri Lanka or sailing around the world. It can be as simple as camping in your backyard an hour away from your home. It's the key is spending time with your family and you know, connecting to that and disconnecting from all of the other many things that distract us, you know.
Well, and
Yeah,
those things
outside
are
of the travel
growing every
experience.
day.
Yeah, yeah, Yeah. So yeah, I'm so glad you enjoyed. Thank
Oh,
you.
I loved it. So talk to me. I've talked to a couple people who written books. And so a lot of times their approach, they have a blog with some sort of focus or niche, and they're approached by a company and they're like, would you like to write this book? And other people have written books where, pardon me, they're self-published their entire book. So this is a completely different approach because you had an idea and you were pitching your idea just like you probably do as a freelance writer.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah. That's
you
great.
what and I love your story. The lady's like, of course I'm gonna do this. And I think the key, right, is that nobody had done it before. And that
Yeah.
was the beauty of it. Is that an approach you would do again? Do you recommend it for other people?
Well, I mean, when I started going down, it wasn't a rabbit hole about learning about publishing, book publishing in particular. But it is, a bit of a different world that I didn't know anything about. And, part of me has been wanting to write a book for a long, long time. Like I used to write really bad poetry in elementary school. I think I've always been a scribbler, and very interested in language. And I love reading and the written word. And I think that everybody does have a book in them, actually, because only you can tell your own story, and that's how I got into blogging in the first place. And writing about travel is because I'm like, oh, other people are writing about travel, and what can I share that's different? And at that time, I was working with like a life coach because I was in like, I don't know, a headspace where I needed a new project. And she said, well, only you can tell your travel story. You've been traveling since you were 6 months old. There's not a lot of people I know who've been doing that. So only you can tell that story. And this light bulb went off. I'm like, it's true. So, you have to write what you know. And I know a lot about family travel, as it turns out, and other subjects too. But that's a passionate subject. And so it really kind of flowed organically. But in looking at the book publishing industry, yeah, there are different ways to go about it. You can self-publish and do it all independently. You can self-publish with the help of a independent publishing agency, and I talked to people about that. The investment to do that was a little bit more than the resources that I had at the time to be able to follow that route, but that's a great option for people. And then there is what many authors, especially in the fictional realm, this is a nonfiction book, have done, like Stephen King or Cheryl Strayed. Send out your book proposal to publishers and agents and see who might want to represent you or is interested in the idea. And so often than not, it's rejection or total, silence, just like pitching freelance articles into the ether and wondering who might be reading your email. So it is really similar from that traditional book publishing side as well. So it was a real learning process. But I needed to invest that time into it in order to understand how to do it properly. And I think I don't know, maybe my ego wanted the cachet of going with like a book publishing house, even though it's a very small Canadian one. But that's fine. I'm in Canada. That works for me. And also learning very quickly that an anthology is not something that a lot of literary agents had any interest in whatsoever, because
That's
it's
wild to me because I think it's much more approachable
yeah,
reading.
it is. And one of the things that I learned from one of the early readers who received the book is the reason why she loved the format of the anthology is because as a busy parent, she doesn't have a lot of time to sit down and read a book, but she can read a story in a book. And
Yeah.
so in the anthology, the 20 stories, none of them are like hugely long. So she can sit down, enjoy her cup of coffee or cup of tea and read a story. And then, the child comes running to her wanting a snack or whatever the needs are, it's constant. And she can put the book down and not get lost in her place because she's managed to have that time, enjoyed a story, left her, her headspace for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then go back to it. I hadn't even thought about the value of that aspect. And I don't think literary agents do either. But in any case, it got it got picked up, it got published. A lot of the marketing and promotional work I have done myself because I think you have to invest time. And I wanted to invest that time because these are great stories that
They
deserve,
are, they are.
they're great stories that deserve to be read. And so, I'm more than happy to shill and talk to everybody that I need to promote it, because I want people to read it and understand why traveling with their family, their parents, their kids is a value, right? And it doesn't have to cost a fortune. It shouldn't have to cost a fortune.
Right,
Just
right.
be
You
done.
don't have to sail around the world. You can,
Don't have,
what
and I
just
never will. I never will.
but you
That is
can
not
still get
me.
that feeling of, um, our family is going to do something unique. I'm going to raise my kids in a different way, or it's just us against the world, or all of those feelings come in this story that's only 5 pages long,
Mhm.
and I think that's what's beautiful about it.
Yeah.
So, would you do it again? Are you doing it again?
Well, you're about the 10th person to ask me, are you going to write a sequel? I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe. I mean, there's many more stories to be told. I mean, it's something I could certainly talk to my publisher about, kind of doing a second version. And many anthologies are repeated, like Lonely Planet publishes travel anthologies, or they used to, I think, almost every year. And Lavinia Spalding, one of the writers in A Gelato a Day, is also the editor of a women's travel anthology that gets published every year. So definitely there's precedent for doing something like that. And
What
I
about for
certainly
you?
enjoyed
Is
the
it worth
process.
it for you? Was
Is
it
it worth it
fun
for
enough?
me?
Was it time well spent?
Yeah, I would think yeah, it was. It was, and the timing of it during the pandemic time, when, things were very different than they were and than they are now, it was the perfect project for that time. And would I go through it again in terms of like the work and the submission and the reading? Yeah, it wasn't, you know, the stories that were written and submitted, required really kind of minimal editing from my part as the editor, because they were written by very good writers, in my opinion, and professionals as well. There were, some who were not, but in terms of the amount of work involved in the actual editing process, it wasn't as onerous as I thought it would be, which was a happy surprise. So yeah, I would do that again. Yeah.
So, how long have you been travel blogging? How long is, because I know you had a different blog before Claudia Travels, but
Yeah,
how
I
long has
did.
that journey happened? Tell us how you got started, and how that's going now, and how
Um,
maybe how that relates to the book, if at all.
It does, actually. I think the short version is that I started back in 2009, which seems like the dinosaur age of blogging now,
Were
like
there
SEO.
computers back then?
Who? What? Well, you're gonna love this. You know the program that I used? It wasn't even WordPress. It was like some proprietary Apple software blogging platform that was like a program is called Sandbox. I don't even know if it exists. Probably not anymore. Like it was, the dawn of blogging time, I swear. And it started as a passion project. Back as I was saying before, I needed something that, kind of channeled some passions and about writing and travel. And it was the synergy of all that. And so it started really as a hobby more than anything else. And more from there as blogging took off. I switched over to WordPress in 2014. And I think back, if only I had done WordPress from the beginning, where would I be now? But whatever, hindsight is, 2020 that way. And it started out as the travelingmom.ca, because I was a traveling mom who was traveling. So it made sense in the .ca Canada. And my kids at the time were, 9 and 11. So they were quite young. Now, of course, the young adults, time has marched on, apparently. Now I measured in their lives versus my own. I'm sure you can relate to that. And as they kind of got older, I recognized that it was time to do a rebrand, which I did probably, I think now it's about 4 years ago, to claudiatravels.com. And I switched over everything and redirected all of that old stuff to not lose that, good SEO
Good.
Google juice that I learned was so important. Thank you, Leslie. um, and and a lot of, I think, that process and writing and doing blogging, but also dipping into the freelance life, which I started doing probably in about the mid early 2000s, because again, I wanted to expand my writing repertoire, and I did like seeing my name on a byline.
For
I
sure.
enjoyed that, and I like that. So I've been kind of straddling this hybrid writing world now for quite a little while, and a part of me thinks there's a real duality, and sometimes I don't know if that's a benefit or a curse to be not focused entirely in one world and another. But as you know, more than anybody else I know, like the web universe and the writing and the SEO universe is constantly changing and morphing, and it's probably not a bad idea to be kind of, in several places trying to
Right.
do maybe too many things at once. But in any case, that's where I'm at. So
It's that as salvation through diversification.
yeah, 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 exactly. So now, in terms of doing claudiatravels.com, I still write about family travel, but a lot of my focus, because my kids are older, I'm doing adventure, over 50, writing, solo women, sustainability, culinary. I've kind of branched out my writing niches to be more reflective of where I am in my life. And no, I'm not writing about, how to navigate a Roman street with a stroller anymore like I used to. I can certainly talk about that, but that's kind of not where it's at in terms of what I'm writing about right now, which is morphed from the beginning, and life has changed. And so,
Until you're strolling your grandkid again one day,
yeah, let's just pause that conversation right now. I know you and I both have kids who've gotten married in the recent past. And, I've pinky sworn with my son and daughter-in-law, no grandkids for at least, 10 years. So we'll see how that goes.
Yes, enjoy yourself first.
Yes, exactly. But they're so young, they need to. But
For sure.
yeah.
So, can we talk about the blogging and freelancing? I think you're the first person we've had on who has their feet in both worlds. Like, how do you decide what's going to go on your blog, what you're going to pitch? How do you manage the revenue side of things? I mean, I have to assume you're making revenue from both sides. So
Yeah.
are you like, ooh, I need to balance that? Or do you have a different strategy altogether?
Well, it really depends. Like, it is very much a hybrid thing. And I was just in Australia for 2 weeks, invited with the Tourism Australia to attend the Australia Travel Exchange. And there were FAMs associated with that before the conference and afterwards. And that invitation, I think, came on the strength of my freelance writing, which was a huge honor, an opportunity to be able to do something like that, and to attend a conference and go to Australia, which I'd never been to before. So that was pretty huge. And from that perspective, the stories that follow, several of them will definitely be for freelance clients that I have. And I talked to editors before I'd left about some of the things I would be doing, to see what the story would be. And they're less, I would say, even though, many media publications have become much more in tune with, the digital needs of SEO and whatnot, the storytelling is often quite different than what I would do, and the stories that I'll produce from a blogging perspective. It's almost like you have to put on your, blogging SEO hat for one. And then a lot of that, honestly, is a lot of information recently gleaned and reminded through your course, that kind of really drilled down into the importance of what is going to work, from one angle. But, the freelancing side is still very much, I would think, storytelling focused, interview based focused. We have to do research for both, different types of writing, but often publications are looking for a really kind of a different style and a different type of story than the story that might work better in a blogging platform.
Mm-hmm.
So now, from a financial point of view, The media universe has really gone through a tornado in the past, even before COVID. During COVID, it got worse. And now, with all of the different challenges facing the media universe, like, I don't even know where things are going to go. From a traditional media perspective, it has become a lot more challenging, like, to really put it bluntly. And the money side, much more challenging. Like, $2 a word. I mean, where's that magical unicorn? No, those days are pretty much gone, unless, you happen to be able to find a particular publication, and maybe it's like super niche, or, being able to work with them requires, an enormous amount of outlay in terms of research and workload,
Mhm.
which might well be worth it. So, the financial life, and I talked on one of my trips in Australia, I talked with a writer who's been doing freelance a lot longer than I have. And he had stories of his days back at Condé Nast when you would get $10,000 and all of your, trip expenses paid to produce, X article or guide. Like, there used to be a lot of money involved in that world, a lot of money. That's no longer the case at all, right? And getting a travel assignment with a major publication is also a real challenge. So the media universe has just changed completely. The internet, everything, and now with, AI writing and all that
That drives me
challenge.
insane.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I've read AI stuff that premium publications have produced. It's total garbage, because obviously an editor never looked at it. It is, it's shocking. On the other hand, the value potential of it as a research tool, I've used it for research and then double checked it against other things. So,
Right.
we're in the real midst of a huge paradigm shift in so many ways, but specifically as it, I think, affects media and writing in general, and how it might affect the way Google works. Like, it's existential.
It is. And I don't want the stories to get lost.
Yeah.
I'm not a storyteller. My brain doesn't work that way, but I do devour the stories that other people write. I'm a consumer of them, and I do feel like they're getting lost. Like, an AI tool will never be able to tell the stories in this book,
Yeah.
right? So that makes me sad. But I do think about what you were. I don't do a lot of freelancing. Um, I I wrote a story once. I went to Jamaica and did psilocybin mushrooms, and
Wow.
wanted to tell. I did an astronomical amount, and wanted to tell that story, and how I had a guide and how it was amazing. And I pitched the story to a couple people and had a place, an international. If I told you the name, everybody listening would know the name of the place, and they were very interested in the story, but they didn't want to pay anything. And they said, we have such a large number of people who want to share their story that we don't have to pay.
Right.
And of course, just like you, I wanted to see my name on the byline, and that was that one time I wanted to tell stories, and so I did it. Which
Yeah.
is the thing I tell people: do not work for free unless there's some extending value. And in this case, the extending value was me seeing my name on the
Yeah.
byline.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah, I totally get it. And often, I mean, that is how, um, a lot of people enter the freelance game, or at least it was in the past. I mean, I don't know about now, because because of COVID, particularly, the number of media, has shrunk too. And
Right.
there's, the either the same or more writers trying to pitch and inundate editors' email inboxes with, great pitches and great stories, and they're being squeezed by, the lack of advertising, or their squeeze of advertising base in terms of what they can pay or not pay, or they just don't want to, um, or they're just, maybe taking advantage of people as well. There was, I don't know, it was, yeah, a big publication that, and the founder had gobs of money, but they weren't paying the writers for stories, and I was like, So yeah, it's a bit of a difficult thing, and I don't know if it's going to get any better. And people have asked me, well, how do you enter into, freelance writing? And one of the things I recommend to people is take a course. Like there's some great, how to pitch freelance, how to pitch freelance editors, how to tune your freelance writing, just like, and updating your blog posts or learning about SEO and or about Pinterest or whatever. There are some great courses out there, and I took advantage of one years ago because I wasn't happy with my pitch game.
Mm.
I thought that there's got to be a way to do this better, and I'm sure that that's changed over time as well. And becoming a better writer, it's a constant process, becoming a better writer. Like I don't think Stephen King ever reaches a point as successful as he is and says, okay, I'm done, I've learned everything I need to know about writing. I don't think so. Like it's an ongoing, and it should be an ongoing process of learning and refinement and editing. And the value of a good editor is huge. Or a second pair of eyes, or even taking a second day to read your own work, because you're like, what was I doing yesterday? This is
That is me.
So
I always say the easiest way for me to see all the errors in my article is to hit publish.
that's right. And then you're like,
maybe I should put this back in draft mode.
Yeah.
So do you have, as we try to wrap up, do you have any thoughts that you would be willing to share with our audience, whether it's about writing a book or doing freelance or entering the blogging space, maybe balancing all of those things? I mean, what somebody who might maybe not just starting their blog today, but maybe in the last couple of years, they're just, ramping up. What lessons have you learned that you could share?
Oh my gosh, wow.
Well, just a few. Question. You don't have to share them all.
Okay,
you can share them all, but
well, okay. Well, one of the things I've learned very late in the blogging game, well, not late, but I wish I'd known it back at the beginning. But honestly, I don't think that there was a huge amount of discussion at that time, because I went to like TBEX conferences back in 2011 and like the talking about SEO, which was not like major discussion topic, or I totally missed it. Maybe it was, and I wasn't paying attention because I was writing stories, and number one, it was something that was just like, oh, it's too much for my brain to handle right now. I don't have time to absorb it all. But I wish in retrospect I had paid more attention to that, learned it earlier, and incorporated that into my vlogging way earlier. And starting off with WordPress platform probably would have been more advantageous as well. Yeah. And then to really focus, in terms of advice for others, it's really focusing on what your passions are and telling the stories and writing from your own level of expertise about what you know about. I don't write about places I haven't been to, because I can't speak with authenticity and authority about those places. And that's been since day one. I haven't done that. People have said, oh, how about this article about this? And I've never been there. I don't know if this is accurate and what you're saying is true. And so I think that's important as well. And I know a lot of people that might be different advice, but that's really important for me from my perspective, because I think the thing that you need at the end of the day is your integrity as an individual, as a writer, as a blogger, author, that your work, that you speak with an authentic voice, and that people come to you for that reason. And ultimately, fingers crossed, the bigger minds of Google and whoever else are rewarding that in some fashion, right? If we're trying to do the best and the right way, whatever that is now in the current form.
Well, I think the two are becoming more and more married, right? I was surprised when Google said, oh, we're not going to penalize you for writing with AI. But then what they said is, people were like, oh, okay. And then everybody dove into AI, and they turned around, only 3 or 4 weeks later and said, but we are going to be rewarding people who can speak with authority and experience.
Yeah.
and that's really what I'm hearing you say is the same thing that you focused on, which in the end always makes the best difference in SEO anyway. So
Well, yeah, and differentiating yourself and what value add are you giving to the reader, to the audience, like the value add for, this is going to show up blurry, but a gelato a day. Thank you. Is the fact that these stories are real, the people are real, their experiences are shared and authentic, and hopefully engaging way to readers, and tell of experiences that are unique, but maybe you've had similar experiences in your life. So you're making a connection and an engagement with the stories. And I think that that can and should also be incorporated into the work we do on the internet and the web, when we're blogging or telling stories online as well, that comes through, and hopefully, reaches to the top of what is going to be found in when people are looking for stories. Because a lot of the stuff that's generated, if it's just all copycat, well, that wears thin really fast.
absolutely.
Right? So yeah, quality over quantity
Every day, all day
every
long.
day. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Claudia. And once again, this is the book, A Gelato a Day. So whether you're a travel writer or you're any other kind of writer, you still need to pick it up. It's fantastic. And thank you for sharing your story with us. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Leslie. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.